So, hello and welcome to this short introductory talk about admissions to Balliol College, Oxford. My name is Sebastian Shimeld and I'm the current tutor for undergraduate admissions at Balliol. What I hope to do over the next few minutes is introduce you to the college itself before moving on to the admissions process, covering the what we're looking for in students, how we go about assessing that, what we're not looking for, and giving you some hints and tips as to how to prepare for the upcoming admissions process. Now, I'm going to keep this brief, but at the end of the talk, I'll point you towards where you can find extra information, both online and also how you can ask us questions if you have specific queries or problems or things that need addressing. So before coming on to talk in detail about Balliol, I just want to introduce you to the Oxford colleges in general. So there'll be a slideshow running alongside my talk and there'll be a little bit of extra information on there. But one of the critical things to understand about Oxford is it isn't structured like most other universities, and that's because the colleges form a parallel structure running alongside departments and faculties. Now, almost all universities have some form of accommodation, student accommodation or hall of residence, where first-year students will live and eat at least during that first year of their undergraduate education. Oxford colleges perform that function, but they are much more than that. Firstly, when you join Oxford and enter a college, you are a member of that college for your entire time as an undergraduate student. Secondly, and this is really important, Oxford colleges are more than just places where students live and socialise. Now, that's not that the place that the student lives and socialise isn't important. It's really important for a student's enjoyment and development of the university experience. But the colleges are also the place where pastoral support, where student welfare is managed, and critically important, they provide guidance for your teaching, for your academic development during your time in Oxford, and are responsible for a component of your education as well. And that's the tutorial programme, the small group teaching, which is that pivotal part of an Oxford education that runs alongside the more conventional teaching streams like lectures and practical classes. Now, across Oxford, there are around 35 colleges that take undergraduate students. Now, that sounds quite complicated. It is quite complicated, especially when you consider that you can choose to direct your application to any one of those 35 colleges which admit students in the particular subject you're applying for. And the colleges are all a little different, and I'll explain a little bit about what makes Balliol distinctive in a moment. But underneath that, I think it's important to remember two things if you're finding this landscape confusing and maybe a bit intimidating. First off, is that you can make what's called an open application. So this is where you apply for the subject but don't specify a college, and your application is then assigned by an algorithm to a college. You can take this process, you can apply in this way across any of the subjects in the university, and you are under no disadvantage if you do so. The second thing to remember is that while the colleges do differ in some important ways, there are far more similarities between colleges than there are differences. And so underneath that diversity of choice, it isn't easy. You cannot really make a bad choice. So having introduced you to the college system, I just want to do a few sort of facts and figures about Balliol before coming on to the admissions process and how that's going to work. So Balliol College is one of the oldest colleges in Oxford. It was established a little over 750 years ago. In terms of the size, so each college takes a certain number of undergraduate students a year. At Balliol, that's usually around 110 students, so that gives us normally, considering those students might be on 3 or 4 year degree programs, normally within the college at any one time there's between 350 and 400 undergraduate students. In terms of the atmosphere of the college, and this is quite a hard thing to pin down, but I think you could regard Balliol as being relatively informal in the way that we approach life, but also academically serious. We pride ourselves on being an academically strong and serious college. One of the key differences, and something you might want to look at if you're thinking of choosing a college, is where in Oxford the college is located. Now, it's not the sense that there are good or bad locations, but they are a little different. Balliol is relatively centrally located in Oxford, so its main site, which is known as the Broad Street site, is pretty close to the centre of Oxford, and then it has considerable additional space, including a lot of extra student accommodation associated with the sports facilities and sports field, which is about 10 minutes walk away from the main site. So that's something a little bit about the environment of Balliol. And I'd really encourage you to go online and have a greater look at the website to find out a little bit more about the college and its history and location relative to other things in Oxford, for example, the Science Park and Science Area. In terms of the academic side of the college, so the way we organise teaching in Balliol is essentially we have small academic teams focused around each particular subject group. So that team might include one or usually more tutors specialised in the subjects. These are normally fellows of the college and also normally academics in the departments and faculties of the Central University. So these are the same people. These teams are usually supported by a number of other teaching staff known as lecturers, and together this group is responsible for guiding your academic development while you're at Oxford, and also for managing the delivery of the tutorial programme. So this small group teaching programme which supports your education and runs alongside the more conventional university teaching methods such as lectures, practical classes and seminars. Alongside the academic side of the college is a welfare and support team whose role is to provide that critically important support for all of our students throughout their time in Oxford. So that's a little bit about the college. I now want to move on to the nuts and bolts of the admissions process. This varies a lot by subject, of course. What we look for precisely in someone applying for mathematics is the specifics of that are a little different to what we might look for in someone applying to study English. But we can roll all of those things up into three basic criteria. We look for, firstly, academic achievement. So that fundamentally is how well you have performed in examinations to date, and also to be predicted if you're still within the school and still have examinations to come, your predicted grades for those examinations. We also look for aptitude. So aptitude is your ability, your potential, your ability to excel at a particular subject. And of course, we look for motivation. So we look for people who are really keen and thirsty to study that particular subject over the course of a university degree. Now, all of those three things sort of wrap up together in this fourth word you'll have seen on the slide, which is potential. Really, what we're trying to understand through our admissions process is, given what you are and what you've achieved so far, where could you be in 3 or 4 years of an undergraduate education, given what the education that we can provide? And we think of this as your potential to excel in a particular subject. Now, how we go about assessing this, again, depends a little bit on the subject, but there are some obvious core components to the assessment process. First of all, applications are made through UCAS, as they are to other UK universities, and part of that UCAS application will be a personal statement, a list of your examination results, both the ones you've achieved and the ones that are predicted, and your school reference. We use all of those in our assessment, as do other UK universities. Alongside that, there are some things which are more specific to Oxford. So firstly, for many subjects, there may be specific admissions tests, so specific to that subject, or perhaps a little bit more general. And for some subjects, we also ask for written work to be submitted. So for written work, this is work that you have done, usually during the course of your schoolwork, which you send in for our tutors to read as part of the assessment process. As well as that, of course, we interview. Now, generally, Oxford receives far more applications than we can possibly interview. And so we have to go through a shortlisting process, and only those candidates which are shortlisted will be invited for interview. And those that are, I'll come on to a little bit about the interviews. I'll tell you a little bit more about the interviews in a moment. In terms of how we make decisions based on this, well, no one of these things which I've mentioned is more important than the others. We can consider all of these bits of evidence together. And I think it's also important to recognise that we take these in what we call in context. We consider contextual data in the process. And what I mean by that is we consider things like your educational background and the things that might have helped or hindered your academic development over the course of your education. We push all this together into making decisions on who we shortlist and to whom we make final offers. I think it's also worth noting that there's a few things that we don't look for in admissions. And some of these things, it may be some popular myths about what we might be after, what we might be trying to assess. I want to dispel some of these. The things we definitely don't consider are sporting achievement. So sports can be fantastic things to do. They're very important for your own personal can be very important for your own personal health and welfare, but we don't consider them in the admissions process. Similarly, we don't consider wealth and we don't consider family connections. I think it's also important to recognise we don't consider your choice of college. As I said before, you can make an open application where you don't choose a college, and that will make no difference to the success or failure of your application. Actually, as interviewers, as tutors, we don't see whether your application has arrived to us through you choosing the college or through the open application route. And also, it's important to understand that through the admissions process, at various points, we move applications between colleges. Now, you will not have a choice, even if you choose a particular college. This might happen to your application. I'm afraid you will not have a choice in this. It will simply happen. And we do this to try and even up the number of applications across the various colleges, and so to ensure that admissions at that level is as fair as we can make it. So that's what we look for and what we don't look for in undergraduate students. So it's a little bit now about the process, the nuts and bolts. So if you're thinking of applying this year, then, well, first of all, applications are usually due in mid-October and made via UCAS, so the Centralised University Application Service. You'll need to identify a referee who can provide a statement on this form in support of your academic record and your academic potential. Normally, this will be a teacher at your school, and in most schools, someone will already have been allocated this year for this process. You will also need to write your own personal statement. So the personal statement needs to speak primarily to your enthusiasm and desire to study the subject and what you've done about it. Don't leave writing this to the last minute. It's an important thing to start thinking about as soon as you're thinking of applying to university. Once the application has been made, then subject tests and written work may be required. It's important to check the web for details of when these will be and to make sure that you will be available on the dates concerned. And then for shortlisted applicants, interviews are likely to run in early December. Now, interviews are an intimidating thing, and I thought I'd say a little bit more about them and how you can perhaps prepare for them before we finish. So I think the fundamental structure of an interview across any of the subjects is that it's generally going to be similar to a tutorial in that subject. Now, what I mean by that is it's likely to take the form of an in-depth academic discussion about some aspect or aspects of the subject you have chosen to study. Generally speaking, all applicants to Oxford are interviewed at least twice, and very often these interviews will be by different colleges. And I think we all recognise that interviews are intimidating and that applicants being interviewed are very likely to be nervous. We understand that and we do as much as we can to help you through that. I think it's important to remember that interviews are not designed to try and trip you up. They are designed to try and bring the best out in you, because fundamentally what we're interested in understanding through an interview is your potential to excel at the particular subject you've applied for at Oxford. I'm often asked when I make presentations to prospective undergraduates, how can I prepare for an interview? By far the best way to do this is to get used to talking about your subject with others. Now, that can be with fellow students, it can be with teachers, it can be with anyone with whom you have contact. Ideally, it should be someone who knows a little bit about the subject, but it doesn't have to be. But what you need to be used to doing is to thinking and discussing your subject with others. And that essentially is what is likely to happen at an interview. So once interviews have been carried out, all of the information that we have, so that's the information on the UCAS form, so the personal statements, the referee statements, the examination results, test scores, written work if it's applicable, and the outcomes of the interviews will all be assessed together in making final decisions. And out of the people interviewed, normally about 1/3 of those will be offered a place at Oxford. The outcomes of this process will normally be communicated to students, to applicants in January. So I'm going to finish there. So I've tried to keep this brief. There's loads more information on this available on the web, and I really encourage you to take the time to find out a little bit more about the college, more about the university, and more about the subjects you want to study. by going to these sources. At the bottom of the slide here, you'll also see ways that you can contact us and ask any specific questions that you may have. I hope you found this useful, and thank you.